Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Zunera Ishaq has been a permanent resident of Canada since 2008. She has put her citizenship ceremony on hold since last year in order to ask the federal court to judge the legality of the 2012 Conservative government policy that would require her to remove her face veil during the ceremony. The federal court found that the policy was illegal and ordered it to be struck down, but the Prime Minister has called the ruling offensive and promises to appeal it. What should the government's role be in regulating religious clothing such as the Niqab? What are the religious reasons for wearing the Niqab? Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Shabir Ally. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So can you tell me, how do we define the term Niqab?
The term niqab usually refers to a face veil. In some classical commentaries on the Quran, dealing with the 33rd chapter of the Quran, the 59th verse, the commentators say, well, a woman should draw a part of her garment over her face in such a way that it comes over, covering either the entire face or leaving one eye or both eyes open so at least she can see the way.
And what does the Quran specifically say about women covering their faces?
Well, the Quran doesn't actually say anything about this. This is only mentioned by the Muslim commentators on the Quran. Actually, the verse that I was referring to says that the Prophet should tell the believing women that they should draw a part of their garments around themselves so that they should be recognized and not molested. And the apparent meaning of the verse is that women should govern themselves in such a way by wearing garments in such a way that they will be recognized by people. And to me, recognized means that their faces would be shown so that they will be known. And when they're known as opposed to some stranger, it is more likely that they will not be molested. That seems to be the obvious statement in the verse. But the commentators took it differently, and they thought that it meant that free women should identify themselves as free women. And how do they do that? By covering their faces. Why? Because they say that the slave women went barefaced, and the free women were expected to cover their faces. So if the women covered their faces, they would be known to be free women. And how would they be protected? Well, the commentators say because the hypocrite men used to attack the slave women. And if they attacked free women as well, and they're asked about this, they will say, oh, we thought that she too was a slave woman. So for the free woman to protect herself, the commentators say, it was necessary for her to cover her face, and therefore she would be immediately identified as a free woman, and she would not be attacked and molested. The commentary here is quite convoluted, and it refers to a practice which we don't know about. Is it true that slave women were uncovering their faces and free women were expected to cover their faces? And even if that were the case at one time, and does it really apply to our society today? Are people attacking women because their faces are uncovered? Or might the opposite happen? In a society where Muslims are minorities, if a Muslim woman covers her face, might she appear to be so strange and foreign that she might become the object of ridicule? And might someone want to pull her garment because they feel this to be something reprehensible or despicable? So we need to see the different circumstances and react accordingly.
Do we know, in the time of the Prophet, was this something that was practiced where women did cover their faces?
It seems that the practice of covering faces, of women covering their faces, is a very ancient practice, and in fact it predates Islam, and it continues after Islam in some ways as well, to the extent that even in a modern marriage, in a society in which women generally have a great deal of freedom and they do not wear traditional garments, nevertheless, at least at a wedding, a bride will wear a veil, however thin, and then symbolically the veil is lifted when it's time to kiss the bride. So the idea of a woman covering her face is a very ancient one. It has to do with ideas of modesty and decency in society and so on. And this practice has survived even after Islam and outside of Muslim communities as well in some traditional societies. You will find, for example, in some ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities that women cover their faces as well.
So in light of the political debate that's going on right now in terms of, that the face veil might be potentially banned in citizenship ceremonies, what is your perspective on that?
Well, it's a difficult perspective to offer. Recently, I offered my perspective in a Friday sermon, and later on, I met a Muslim brother who was giving me my earful because of my perspective. But nevertheless, I feel that we all need to discuss this, and we all need to honestly share our perspective so that we can listen to each other and then pick the best way forward. In a society like Canada, where Muslims are a minority, it is important that we have our perspectives in order, and we pick our battles, if I use that term. You see, it is one thing for Canadians in general to be concerned about civil rights, and this becomes a civil rights issue. The question is, why should the government have the right to impose on people what they wear and do not wear? And so this is general. This is Canadian democracy in motion here. Citizens should have this right, whether to wear clothes or not to wear clothes. This is the rights of the citizens. And they don't want the government to encroach on that right beyond necessity. So for Canadians in general, this is the issue for battle. They cannot allow the government to intervene, and they're insisting that the government should allow this woman in particular, and Muslim women in general, or people more generally, to come to the citizenship ceremony with a niqab or without the niqab as they please. But for Muslims here as a minority, do we need to make this our battle? If there is something like that, it's so clearly part of Islam, then we need to make that our battle. We need to insist this is all right. We need to do this. Like, for example, where this woman in Quebec could not be heard by a judge because she was wearing the head cover. Now, there is a good case for arguing that Muslim women should have a head cover. That the head cover is mentioned in the Quran in Surah 24, verse number 31. The head cover is mentioned in some hadiths attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the idea of a Muslim woman covering her head, this is now arguably an important part of the Islamic ethos. And so if somebody is encroaching on that right of a Muslim woman to cover her head, we need to defend that right as a Muslim community. But now the face covering, do we need to make that our battle? And I think not, because in fact, when we look at what is attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in this regard, it is clear that when women were setting out for the pilgrimage, he instructed them not to cover their faces. And the pilgrimage is the largest gathering of Muslims. It's a worldwide gathering of strangers and family alike. And if a Muslim woman would be allowed to expose her face in that gathering, in fact, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is deliberately telling them, don't cover your faces. If he's telling them not to cover their faces in that massive gathering, then it means that covering the face is not an Islamic requirement. Now, somebody will come back at me for this and say, well, there is a statement that Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him, mother of the believers, said that, yes, but when a group of riders came by us, we pulled the covering back on our faces, and when they left, that's when we lifted it up again. But that's probably the sentiment of the women at the time, if we take this to be a true attribution to the mother of the believers. It may be that they felt, because it was the common practice to cover their faces, that they can't leave it open because, look, a stranger is looking at us. So if that's their sentiment, that does not make it a rule for Muslim women for all time. What would make it a rule is an explicit injunction, either in the Quran itself, which there is no such, or in these statements authentically attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, which there is no such. In fact, the contrary, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is reported to have told the women, don't cover your faces when you go and perform the pilgrimage.
So if we agree then that, face veiling is not a religious obligation, then should we be speaking out from a Charter of Rights perspective? Because a lot of organizations, Muslim and non-Muslims, that I've heard about have come out and said this is not the place for the government to say what a woman should or should not wear. And it's sort of also speaking to some of the comments that the Prime Minister has made in terms of, women who cover their faces, and he used some terminology along the lines of, coming from an oppressed culture. So is that a battle that we're fighting then, you think?
Well, the Prime Minister's comments are offensive to Muslims because it seems to imply, he may have meant something else, but it seems to imply that the Muslim culture is somehow oppressive to women, and that's an offensive comment. We need to clarify that with our Prime Minister and on shows like this. At the same time, when our fellow Canadians are battling for the rights of citizens in general, that affects all Canadians and us in particular, we should join our fellow Canadians in battling for human rights and for civil rights. But we should not make this our battle. This is the battle of Canadian citizens in general, arguing for the rights of citizens. When it becomes our battle in particular is when something that is so intrinsic to our religion is being taken away from us. That's when we need to say, well, wait a minute, this is very important to us. We need to get this straight, and we need the support of our fellow Canadians to help us to retain this right. The niqab, to me, is not one of those things that we should be making central to what it means to be a Muslim in Canada.
So engaging, when you say we shouldn't make it our battle, are you suggesting that we shouldn't are you suggesting that we should work in partnership with other organizations and sort of speak on it from a perspective of, these are charter rights that people should have the right to dress a certain way? Or are you saying we sort of take a back seat, let it happen? Because I think the other conversation where people are feeling the need to speak out is also because we're living in a time where, we have Bill C-51 and other bills which are fostering a sense of Islamophobia in our communities.
Yes, in all of these cases, whether it be the niqab issue or this Bill C-51 issue, I'm not saying no, take a back seat and let it all happen. I'm saying join forces with our fellow Canadians. But in the case of the niqab issue, we should not make that we are championing this. It's not. We're not battling for the right of a woman to enter the citizenship ceremony with her niqab on because this is an Islamic thing. If we join this in this battle with our fellow Canadians, and we should, then it is because this is a matter of civil rights, and we respect the civil rights which have been granted to Canadians in general, and we enjoy the same civil rights. And we want these rights to be in place, not because we want to show up everywhere with niqabs, but because we want to retain these important rights for the citizens of Canada in general. And it could be niqab one day, it could be something else another day. The niqab might affect some Muslim women who want to wear the niqab today, but some other right could be repealed that could affect Canadians more generally tomorrow. And so we want to join with our fellow Canadians in maintaining the civil rights that have been so far a part of the Canadian landscape. But we're not battling this because it is an Islamic issue. No, we should say that niqab for women in Canada is not an issue. In fact, Muslim women in Canada should show their faces because that will help Canadians to feel more at home with Muslim Canadians and feel that Canadians are here, readily identifiable, having a face to the name, and they're people that we can see and recognize. And to be honest, if somebody's covering his or her face, you don't really know who is behind that veil. To use an Islamic setting, you have the men in one area, the women in another area in the mosque. If a man has bad intentions, he could actually cover his face and go sit among the women, and we wouldn't know, is he a man or a woman? So while the face covering has served a good purpose in some traditional Muslim societies, and in some traditional societies that are not Muslim, it also has some disadvantages. And when weighing all of the advantages and disadvantages in our present situation of Muslims living in Canada as a minority, the disadvantages actually seem to outweigh the advantages. And the disadvantages generally fall more heavily on the few Muslim women who feel that they have to wear the niqab. And we might say, well, this is the freedom of the woman. If she is convinced that this is her religious practice, then yeah, she should have the right to wear that, and I agree. But we should then ask within the Muslim community, who is helping the Muslim woman to feel that this is her responsibility to wear the niqab? It is often the Muslim preacher from the pulpit, from the delivering a Friday sermon, or male writers who are insisting that this is a part of our religion by copying traditional commentaries on the Quran, which on this particular point seem to belong in a very different culture and situation. If Muslim commentators look back at the Quranic text and look at our situation today, they should explain the verse in question, Surah 33, verse number 59, as meaning that a Muslim woman should carry herself in a dignified way so that she is recognized as a dignified person, and for that reason people with bad intentions would not think to do any harm to her, and she would be recognized by face as a real human person, and for that alone would dissuade people from attacking her or trying to molest her.
This was a very engaging conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.